Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Carolyn Coker-Ross, and today we're going to be continuing to talk about emotional eating. So, the topic today is emotions, food, and the body. And you'll be learning about the definition of emotional eating, how emotional eating and stress are related, emotional eating and binge eating are related, and also emotional eating and depression. And in order to make the most of emotions, it's important that we know how to manage or regulate them without using food. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, if you identify as an emotional or stress eater, think back because this problem probably started in childhood for you or earlier in your life. As a child, if you were not taught how to deal with your emotions or how to manage your emotions, you may be at higher risk for engaging in emotional eating as an adult. Now, maybe you were the kind of kid who had trouble postponing gratification, or you threw tantrums when you didn't get your way. That's an example of not being able to manage your emotions. So, again, this lack of emotional regulation um, sometimes is a lack of being taught how to do that, or it may be just the way that your personality is. But it does put you at higher risk for overeating, emotional eating, and stress eating. Now, interestingly, if you're a person who had difficulty just accepting your feelings and being emotionally upset, being able to accept that you were sad or angry or afraid, um, that can make it difficult for you to concentrate, focus, complete tasks and or work duties, and it may make you more likely also to struggle with food and weight issues. So this is important to know because sometimes you may feel like your emotional eating just happens out of the blue, or it's random, or it's happening in a vacuum. So what I'm trying to educate you about or tell you about and help you understand is that emotional eating has a root cause. Now, all of us emotionally eat. I said this in the last video. You know, we all overeat, like at Thanksgiving, there's a lot of tension or there's a lot of celebration. But if your only way of dealing with your emotions is mainly through food, then you may be an emotional eater. And at the end of this video, um, I will also be talking to you about a way that you can find out if you are an emotional eater. There's a quiz that you can take. Now, overeating may unconsciously be your way of trying to change or numb or push away those negative feelings. But just ask yourself, how long do you really get relief from, your feelings after a binge or an overeating experience? You may start out eating in response to anger or fear or sadness, only to find that your anger is still there after a binge. Only now you're angry at yourself for having the binge, right? For your eating habits. So, on top of that, you may then feel embarrassed and guilty about binging. And bottom line is, the point is, using food to manage your emotions is just not the most effective strategy. Food is not the answer to emotions. Never has been, never will be. It may have been something you learned when you were a child and you didn't have any other ways of coping with your feelings. And that's perfectly understanding. And we're not trying to invalidate what happened to you as a child and how you coped, which was obviously the best way that you knew how to cope. But now, as an adult, this kind of coping mechanism may be causing you more problems than it is helping you. So, you may have learned at a very young age to suppress all or certain emotions. So, maybe you were taught that um, either through experience or by watching your parents or other people in your family and how they dealt with emotions. So if every time you were upset, you were told when you were a child, be a good girls don't cry, or boys don't cry, if you heard that message over and over, then you may have taken for granted that This is just how it's supposed to be. This is how I'm supposed to be. And so that's what you that's what you learned in childhood, that's what you're doing in adulthood. Or you may have had a parent who was very excessive in their anger, or overly emotional about even small things. And for example, if you had a father or a mother who raged, maybe they were an alcoholic and they would get angry when they drank and get very aggressive, that may have frightened you. And this could lead to you avoiding expressing anger because it just doesn't feel safe. This childhood experience can show up in adulthood as a fear of anyone who expresses anger, even if it's normal and healthy anger. So this in turn can lead to you avoiding conflict in your relationships, which obviously is not going to be very healthy for you. Another scenario would be like the child who identifies with and then tries to emulate the alcoholic parent who gets really angry, seeing him or her as maybe the stronger parent, the more dominant parent. So in adulthood, you may, if you do identify with that particular parent, you may have become the person who actually rages yourself, just as your father or mother did when you were growing up. Now, abuse or neglect or any of the above negative experiences in childhood leads to what we call toxic stress. Obviously, there's healthy stress, which is stress where you have enough support and enough skills and understanding and maturity to manage the stress. Then there's toxic stress, which completely overwhelms most people's coping mechanism. And toxic stress, or any severe stress in childhood, is almost always toxic because children just don't have the skills to learn how to manage stress when it's very severe, as in the case of chronic abuse or neglect. Those are instances where children don't know how to manage their feelings. And so they just do the best they can, whether it be using food or some other way of coping. So if you were one of those children who experienced toxic stress, then you lived your life in a fight, flight, or freeze mode. Try to say that 10 times. Fight, flight, or freeze mode. Everything in the world may have seemed dangerous or unsafe to you, and you may have learned not to trust people because, life, because of these experiences, and life doesn't feel safe. So whether you have a history of specific trauma, abuse, or neglect, or you're just wired differently, you have that kind of personality, in terms of how strongly you feel your emotions and your ability to relate to your emotions, it's important to understand that emotions are the driving force behind your behaviors. So you may think that your binge episode just happens or you're just stressed out. But generally speaking, that binge is the result of an uncomfortable emotional uh, experience or a very stressful life experience. And so if you can, start to focus on the not just the behavior of the binge, but on the emotion that's driving that behavior. So remember that overeating, emotional eating is really not about food. It's about how we use food. Now, when you start to accept and begin to honor and learn to manage your emotions without food, you'll be able to address your soul's hunger, which is not for food at all. That's why I say it's not about the food, but your own inner hunger, your soul's hunger, is a need for self-expression and for healing. And that's what we talked about in the last video, which is what are you really hungry for? So what the soul is really hungry for is for that self-expression and for healing. Okay, so thanks for listening to this. And I wanted to give you a few techniques that you can put into place if you want to begin to end your emotional eating. First of all, when you find yourself wanting to emotionally overeat or to stress eat, see if you can identify the emotion that you're feeling. and try to think about, what is this emotion trying to tell me? So every emotion has a purpose. And oftentimes, if we've had that traumatic experience in childhood, the purpose in our child's mind is to keep us safe, to help us survive. But for the adult, you may be, again, triggering that need for safety, for comfort, for attention, for love, whatever it is. See if you can identify what purpose your emotion is. What is your emotion trying to say? Secondly, try not to judge what you're feeling. Don't judge your emotion. Don't say to yourself, you shouldn't be feeling that, or something's wrong with you. Why are you feeling that? Just stay curious about it. Think of your emotion as energy that needs to be expressed. So therefore it needs to move. So when you push it down with food, you're not allowing that energy to move through you, and therefore it can get stuck. So how can you move or express that energy or that emotion in a way that does not hurt you or does not hurt other people? Now, on the next video, I'm going to be talking about how unconscious beliefs that often start in childhood and may be the result of childhood experiences and then become unconscious when you're an adult, but they are part of what causes emotional eating. So these unconscious beliefs may be things like, I'm not worthy or I'm not lovable. So join me next time. Be sure and subscribe to my channel and turn on your notification icon so you can get notified immediately to upload the new video. And as I mentioned earlier, you're going to be able to find out if you are an emotional eater by taking the quiz on emotional eating. And the link to that quiz is below this video. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.